Hey everybody. I hate to interrupt good conversation. I'm Stacy Rector. I'm the Director of Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, and I'm really glad y'all are here. And I know people will be coming in and out, so just prepare, including our own Rafia, who's got your napkins. Napkins will finally be arriving. Anyway, I want to turn it over to Jasmine Woodson, who's going to tell us a little bit about who she is and then introduce our speaker, and then they're going to sit down and have a conversation. So come on up, Jasmine.
Hey guys, good morning. Thank you. Thank you guys for being here. I hope you're ready for this great conversation, and I also hope you're enjoying the chicken and biscuits. Like Stacy said, my name is Jasmine Woodson. I'm the Director of Tennessee Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. And today we're going to have a conversation about something that's a growing concern amongst conservatives all over the nation, and that is the death penalty, pro-life. As you know, as conservative, our values are limited government, fiscal responsibility, pro-life policies, and we have to think how the death penalty aligns with that. Because of these growing efforts and concerns, conservatives are leading efforts to address wrongful convictions and death sentences nationwide, including Oklahoma, Texas, and Ohio. One question surrounding these conversations that I believe deserves more attention is what being a pro-life conservative means regarding the death penalty. And on that note, I'm grateful to have Adam Luck with us today, an Oklahoma conservative who brings firsthand experience and insight from his time as the chairman of the Oklahoma Pardon Parole Board. Thank you for being with us today, Adam. And after our discussion, we'll open it up to questions. Again, thank you guys so much for being here. Okay, Adam, can you start by briefly telling us about your experience and how you ended up on the Oklahoma Board of Pardon and Parole?
Sure. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here. Like Jasmine said, my name is Adam, and it's an honor to be here with you this morning. I am from Oklahoma. I grew up there, and then I left to serve 5 years in the Air Force and traveled around a little bit with my family. Came back in 2015, so I've been back in Oklahoma for about 11 years. When I came back, I was appointed to the Oklahoma Board of Corrections, which is the governing body that oversees the Department of Corrections. So for 3 years, I had the opportunity to visit every prison in the state of Oklahoma. And at the time, Oklahoma had the highest female incarceration rate in the world, and we had the highest male incarceration rate in the world. And as someone from the Christian faith and having grown up there, it was something that I didn't really realize, even though it was part of my own parents' story, it was something that I had never really experienced. And so coming back as an adult, I was really wrestling with how we as a state could have probably more churches per capita than any place in the world, and yet these metrics by which you judge how well a society is doing, oftentimes we were first in the things that we should be last in, and last in the things that we should be first in, and incarceration was no exception to that. So I started wrestling with what that looked like and what it would look like to start to change those things, and that was part of my motivation for being on the Board of Corrections. Through that experience, I was appointed by our next governor to the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board, which is the 5-member board in Oklahoma that's charged with making decisions about whether or not people are ready to get out of prison in Oklahoma for parole, and whether or not their sentence should be changed through a commutation if laws change in our state. And then it's also the board that is charged with voting whether or not to grant someone clemency before they are executed. So this is the last opportunity somebody has to request mercy before their execution date. And the governor cannot make a decision on that case unless it makes it through the Pardon and Parole Board and gets 3 out of 5 members to vote yes on a clemency case. So when I was appointed to the Pardon and Parole Board, we as a state were not conducting executions. We were in what's called a moratorium, so we had paused executions in Oklahoma because we had had such a difficult time finding drugs, and our execution protocols had resulted in 2 botched executions, and we had actually used the wrong drugs in 2 executions and did not realize it in 2015. And one of the gentlemen, we had actually scheduled 2 executions on the same night. And the first execution, we had used the wrong drug but didn't realize it. And the second execution was hours away from happening when we realized that we had used the wrong drug already. And so we paused executions. I don't know if you remember, but it made international news. It was all over the headlines. That gentleman who was scheduled to be executed and that was his 3rd last meal that this gentleman had had. He'd had 8 execution dates. And his name's Richard Glossop. You may know that name because it's also been in international headlines in the state of Oklahoma, because 1 year ago, his case made it all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they remanded his case back down to be retried because they don't believe that he is guilty. And our Attorney General made history in the state of Oklahoma for being the first time the state Attorney General was asking the U.S. Supreme Court to not make him carry out this execution because his case was so botched. So we were hours away from executing somebody in the state of Oklahoma that likely will not have the death penalty again. It's likely that his trial is going to result in something less than what he's already received, and will likely be a free man. And we were very, very close to executing him again. In the state of Oklahoma, we have had 11 people exonerated off of death row. And in the United States, we've exonerated 202 people off of death row since 1973. That's considered the modern era of the death penalty. So, long answer to your question, but that was my experience getting to the Pardon and Parole Board, and part of why I enjoy coming and sharing about my experiences, because as a Christian and as someone who grew up in Oklahoma, it was something I never really considered. I didn't have to think very deeply about it because I had no proximity to it. And I think that's unfortunately the position that a lot of folks find themselves in, is it's just something that we don't have to think a lot about. But having had to vote on the life of another human being 5 times, I had to deeply consider why I believe what I believe. And it changed my mind, and it changed my heart. And it's part of why I do the work that I do today.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Can you tell us what assumptions you held about the death penalty prior to your service on the board?
Sure. I think it's probably similar to what a lot of people believe about the death penalty, which is that it's reserved for the worst of the worst. And I think when people talk about the death penalty, oftentimes the conversation moves very quickly to specific cases. Well, what about this? What about the person who does this? Or what about the person who does that? Don't you think they deserve to die? And because I never really had to deeply consider my position, I think I was intellectually allowed to hold those beliefs without closely examining them. But when I actually had to vote on the life of another human being, I had to zoom out and ask questions about the system that was in place to carry out those executions. So as a conservative, I had to say, well, do I believe that my government is competent, even if I thought that capital punishment should be a thing? Do I believe that my government is competent enough to carry out an execution? So we have to decide personally and individually, what level of competency do you want your government to have to carry out an execution? And how do you measure that? So for us, we would measure competency as, did we get it right? Was it truly reserved for the worst of the worst? Are we totally sure, 100% sure, that this person is actually guilty, they actually committed this crime? And how competent do we want them to be in practically doing what is, I think, one of the most important things a government can do with one of its citizens, which is decide whether or not they should live or die. And if we decide they should die, then how competent are we in actually carrying that out? And so I never really thought deeply about that until I was on the Pardon and Parole Board. So that's one belief. And then another belief that I had before I joined the Pardon and Parole Board was just that it was other people. It didn't affect me. It was not something that I had thought deeply about. But when you examine the system, you realize that you can't put distance between yourself and these decisions. You have to bring it closer to you. You have to say, well, am I okay with executing an innocent person? I mean, I think that's a very basic question. Are you okay with your community, your state, executing someone who is innocent? And if you are okay with that, you have to say how many. Sorry, Jasmine. You have to say how many. How many innocent people are you okay with your state executing? Because the reality is, it is an inherent part of capital punishment. There will always be a risk that you get it wrong. And in my experience, in my view, and in the proximity that I gained to it, I realized that that was a wrong way of thinking, that it was someone else. And it was okay if we got it wrong sometimes, because what I realized is that that puts a distance between you that is not actually, it's not actually real. There shouldn't be that distance between you and these decisions. You should say, well, would I be okay with knowing, if I ultimately can pick a number, like in Oklahoma, if I could say that, you know, I'm okay with us getting it wrong 11 times, and compared to the number of exonerations and the number of executions, we get it wrong about 1 in 10 times. So about 10% of the time. So if I'm okay with just how it is today, I have to then ask, well, am I okay with knowing who that 1 in 10 is? And I mean, right away, I would just say, no, I'm not. I absolutely would not be. Some people might say, well, if we get 9 bad guys and 1 person has to die, then I'm okay with that. And I've heard people say that, and in grace, I've walked them through the rest of this conversation too, but still I would say, okay, well, what about not just knowing who they are, but what if it was a family or a friend, like somebody close to you? And they say, well, like, okay, you know, personally I would say, I would still be a no, obviously. I would fight to keep that from happening. With all of my being, I would try to stop that from happening. And then ultimately you have to answer the question, am I okay with being the 1 in 10? Do I believe so strongly in capital punishment and the inherent risk of executing someone innocent that I would be willing to die to preserve this system? And I just think most people, when you get to that point, would just say, no, I wouldn't be. If I didn't commit the crime, I wouldn't want to die to preserve this system. And I think the unfortunate truth is that most of us just don't think that deeply about it. And so those were some of the beliefs that I held before I was in a position where I had to really closely examine what I believed.
That's amazing. That actually gave me cold chills there at the end. Thank you for sharing that. Oklahoma went through significant controversy over execution protocols. What was the secrecy around the drug sourcing part of that controversy, and how did it affect your confidence in the system?
Yes. Well, and I know Tennessee is working through this right now, as are many states in the United States. These drugs are becoming harder and harder to get, and there's a reason. So medical professionals do not really want to be affiliated with executions because on a basic level, their commitment is, as a medical professional, is to do no harm. So if they are providing drugs that eventually kill somebody, they don't want to be involved in that chain. In the military, they say it plainly. It's called a kill chain. If you're involved in any process that ultimately could take the life of a person, the scrutiny in that process is elevated because it's that much more serious. And in our experience, medical professionals don't want to have anything to do with that because they know it will affect them professionally, it will affect their business, and ethically, I think most of them are at least a little bit uncomfortable with it. And I have known the last 4 directors of the Department of Corrections in the state of Oklahoma, including our state's longest serving DOC director in state history. He'd worked for the Department of Corrections for 35 years. He personally oversaw 28 executions. And later in his life, and he actually came to the Capitol as Oklahoma was working on a similar bill and just really wrestling through what we should be doing as a state, he came and testified. And he said, you would be shocked at the places that I had to go to find these drugs. Another DOC director said, I traveled the globe trying to find these drugs. And ultimately in Oklahoma, it resulted in us using the wrong one. Even with all that scrutiny on where these drugs are coming from and the process and the protocols, we still messed it up. And it took us 43 minutes to execute somebody. I mean, it is inhumane. I mean, I believe on a basic level at this point it's inhumane regardless, but to cause that kind of pain, and the incompetency, the level of incompetency to not even know what drug we're using is, to me, unconscionable. I cannot imagine how in any world that would be okay. And it's because it's become so hard to find the drugs. It's because there's so much secrecy. It's because the bar to engage has become so risky that people are so averse to it. And I think for me, it's data points that we are getting to the end of this chapter in our nation's history. Future generations are going to look back and they are going to say, how did you allow that to happen? Right. In the same way that we look back and have learned from our history and have asked, how did they allow that to happen? And we examine that in our own hearts and ask, well, what are we allowing to happen today that future generations are going to ask us? And I believe capital punishment is one of those things. And so, execution protocols was one, the drugs was another one, and the toll, the human toll on people who have to carry these things out. We were in a position several years ago where our Attorney General, who was unelected, he was appointed after an Attorney General resigned, had set an execution pace of 1 a month. And you can go back and read articles that were published at the time that talked about the near constant pace of mock executions that were required to keep the correctional professionals prepared for these executions, and the toll that it took not only on the people who were on these teams, but even the administrative staff. I mean, they were talking about people who were just sitting at the front desk, and the toll it took on them to have to hear, they could overhear the procedures, and they were watching people come in, and the human toll that it took on people to have to carry these things out. And it's just not something that we normally consider, but it absolutely is a cost, asking people to do this. And then, one thing that really sticks out is that corrections director who had overseen more executions than any other director in state history. He testified, he said, it's not a matter of if, it is a matter of when we botch another execution. It is going to happen. Whether it's because of the execution protocols or the drugs, or we get it wrong and the person's not actually guilty, it is going to happen again. It is inevitable. It is a part of the system. We're human beings. We're not perfect. We don't get it right every time. And in his view, it shouldn't happen anymore. And I think for an issue as important as this, we have to listen to people who have proximity to it. I've heard the analogy used, like, if 1 out of every 10 plane was crashing, I'm about to fly out later today, I have 5 kids, and, they're asking, like, where am I going, what am I doing, and this was the first time that I thought about it before, but not as much this time, but I just thought, like, life sometimes feels so precarious, like, you get on a plane and you don't really think about, like, how high in the air you are, and it's like, well, gosh, like, I don't know if I should be traveling this much, I have these precious lives at home that I want to be around for, but if 1 out of 10 planes were crashing, we wouldn't all sit around and be like, well, I guess that's just the cost of doing business. No, we've seen it before. When a specific plane crashes multiple times, they ground every single plane. They're like, that plane is not taking off anymore. And we go and we listen to professionals, we get the manufacturers of that plane, we get the airline industry, and we all get around the table and say, what is going on? We cannot, this is too much. And I feel like in this issue, we've got to listen to the people who have proximity to it. And the vast majority of them, especially after they exit what I would say is a traumatic experience of having to oversee and be a part of these executions, the vast majority of them express remorse and regret, and they wish that it would stop. And so anyway, those are some of the issues that Oklahoma has dealt with that are not unique to Oklahoma. They are common. Anywhere the death penalty is practiced, you will find those same issues.
Yeah, I think you made some great points, especially I think people forget that another human is taking away a human life. This isn't automated, this isn't AI, an actual human is having to take the life of another human. What questions should Tennessee lawmakers be asking right now that may not be given enough attention?
Well, I think specific with SB 2308, you should know who is involved in this process. Like, if there is ever a decision that a government is going to make about its citizens, whether or not they live or die, there should be ultimate transparency. What could be more important? You should know exactly where these drugs are coming from. You should know exactly who's involved in the process. And maybe not everybody should know. Maybe it's not publicly available information. But those of you that are charged with making these decisions, you absolutely should have that information. And if you don't have it, then who does? And I would argue, based on my experience and firsthand conversations I've had with DOC directors and staff, it's too heavy a burden for them to carry on their own. And we've seen in Oklahoma that professionally, they shouldn't be allowed to carry it on their own. It's too important, it's too convoluted, and it's too detailed for it to be secret. What other process do we have as a society that's this detailed, this important, that is secret, that only has a few people looking at it? That's okay.
Sorry, we're all here in Senate Finance.
Yeah.
It's okay. I'll segue into our final question, and then I will open it up for questions from you guys. If you guys don't have any, I'll ask him a couple more. But if a legislator asked you today for your advice, what would you tell them?
I would start with encouraging them to go to a clemency hearing. If you've never sat and had to listen to what may be someone's final public words as a legislator in a state that's practicing capital punishment, you should go do that. You should go hear those words. You should go see what your pardon and parole board process looks like, and ask yourself, if that was me, would I feel honored by this process? Would I want to be a part of this process? If that was my family member, would I feel like this process was fair? So that would be encouragement one, is go to your pardon and parole board meeting, and specifically with the authority you have, go ask to view a clemency hearing. And it's morbid, but if you have the ability, which I believe you do as a legislator, and your state is practicing capital punishment, you should go watch an execution. The reality is, it's happening. It's happening under our watch, and it is happening in our name. In Oklahoma, it says, "We the people of Oklahoma," on the certificate of death, and the manner of death is homicide. And that is the reality. That is what we are doing. And especially as a legislator, especially as a lawmaker and decision maker, elected to help your community make difficult decisions and represent them, you should know in as much detail as possible how your state is practicing capital punishment. And I believe once you gain proximity to it, there's going to be some measure of discomfort there that did not exist before. And then my encouragement would be to wrestle with that and to lean into that and figure out why that makes you uncomfortable. And if you can get to the point where you agree with it again, or where the protocols are to a point where you feel like it's happening in the right way, or the government is doing it at a level of competency that you agree with, then you can move forward in your support of capital punishment. But I would argue, and I would encourage a lawmaker, that until they get to that point and really closely examine their beliefs, I would in grace encourage them to hold two things at one time: the theoretical belief that capital punishment should exist, and questions about how your state is doing it. You can hold both those things at the same time. And in my own journey, my own process, I had to hold both of those things at the same time, and eventually I let one go because I couldn't let go of this one. And that would be my encouragement to Tennessee lawmakers, is to pick this up and be willing to journey with both of them for a little bit until you decide which one you need to let go of.
Thank you. Guys, I think Adam did an amazing job. So can we please give him a round of applause? So I'm sure you guys learned a lot just now, as did I, and I'm around this every day. If you guys have any questions, now would be a great time to ask them.
Hi, I'm Rhonda, and I was a critical care nurse in the past life. And so when we had a medical error or a code that didn't go well, we always had, sometimes had psych support. So do the people that carry out executions have psych support for the role that they have to play?
I think that there is, they've got several teams who do that. They have a medical professional who is there and present. But again, there's so much secrecy around it that we don't really know in detail who all is there and what support they're really providing.
So even you at the level that you were at, you don't know who's there?
Correct. Yeah. We don't know the names of who is there. It's even in Oklahoma. It's not information that certainly is not publicly available, but it's not made available to those in authority over these decisions. And in Oklahoma, I mean, we had so many go wrong. So I imagine in your profession, if you had a code called that was wrong or something didn't go well, there's a long process afterwards where you all retrospectively look back and ask, okay, how did this happen? And it becomes a learning opportunity. Maybe there, at some point there's some accountability needed for exactly how this happened, and I would imagine you document that so that there's learning and there's accountability to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And in Oklahoma, we haven't had that. I mean, after we paused executions after the second botched execution, and after we realized we used the wrong drugs, we created what's called the Death Penalty Review Commission. And it was a bipartisan group that spent 18 months reviewing Oklahoma's execution protocols and the entire capital punishment system. It was led by a former governor and a former federal judge, former speaker of the Oklahoma House of Representatives. So, I mean, it was Democrats, Republicans, we had prosecutors, victims representatives. I mean, all perspectives represented in the capital punishment system were on this review commission. And they came out with a report, which I'd encourage you to look up. It's the Oklahoma Death Penalty Review Commission report. They had 43 very specific recommendations. And their first one was extend the moratorium until some or all of these recommendations can be implemented. And that was in I believe it was either 2016 or 2017 that it came out. So, I mean, 9 or 10 years ago, and not a single one of them have been implemented in Oklahoma. And so for us, we look at, like, even when something does go wrong and we go back and review it, and it takes so much effort to get a body in place that can have the authority to review these things. And now what we're working on is pausing executions again so that we can go back and implement some of these things. All we're doing is asking, like, it's okay to say you want, I don't agree, but it's okay to say you want to have executions, but you have to say how you want them carried out. And in Oklahoma, that's what we're working on right now, is implement some of these recommendations so that we as a state can say that we're doing it competently, even though I don't think that we should be doing it. That's where we're having to start with some of our members of our legislature.
Hi, sorry, I was just kind of curious. This is like a general question, but why do you think we allow for the death penalty to continue to be implemented if we're already aware of like discrepancies and inaccuracy of like executions? Like you said, it's not like really a question of if, but when the next execution is botched. So why do you think that's continued today?
I think it is only a matter of time before that changes. Nationally, we are executing fewer people, and realistically, there's less than half of the states in the United States that even have capital punishment as a law anymore, and even fewer of the ones who have it as a law are actually practicing it, which means prosecutors are requesting the death penalty, juries are handing out the death penalty, and then departments of corrections and governors even are applying the death penalty. So fewer and fewer states are doing it where it's even legal. So I think in your lifetime, you'll see most of those states stop practicing capital punishment. But for right now, we are. And I think it really gets down to, at a basic level, the difference between schools of thought. What do we do when someone does something wrong? And are we here for a retribution, or are we here for a restoration? And yes, when somebody does something that would require the death penalty, if they are guilty, they have posed a risk to our community that requires them to be somewhere else. They are a danger. They did do that thing. There is something that has to happen. And just based on my faith, another layer to this, which we didn't really even talk about, but you know, as a Christian and as a follower of Jesus, I had to go back and read his words and look at his life and his teachings and ask, if this were a decision that Jesus was making, how would he go about making this decision? And in my reading of the scripture, I see over and over again Jesus being given the opportunity to speak into a situation where someone was by the standard of that day convicted of a crime, and he offered grace and he offered mercy. Not only that, but Jesus, you know, I worship Jesus who was wrongfully executed. And in his dying breaths, he spoke to a man who was rightfully executed and welcomed him, was the first person to welcome him into heaven. And, you know, I think for those of us that are like coming into and inheriting these systems that we didn't create, we get to offer a fresh perspective. And without the responsibility of having been involved in creating the system, we can look at it objectively and say, is this right? Do I agree with this? And I think more and more people are stepping into these positions of authority and proximity to these issues and saying, I actually don't agree with this. I don't think that we should be doing this. So in my view, there's always an opportunity for restoration, even for someone who has done something very, very terrible. And it's hard for me to imagine being in a position morally and ethically where I am okay with effectively ending their opportunity for restoration and saying, okay, God, I know things could change, but we've decided that that process is going to end. Grace and mercy and restoration are no longer possible for this person. It's time for their life to end. And I couldn't get to that place. So I think that's really what it comes down to is two different ways of thinking. Are we mad at someone and do they need to be punished? Or are we in the business of figuring out what their path back to restoration and wholeness is with themselves, with the community and where harm was caused, and with God? And I think when you see places in the world where that's their focus is on restoration and wholeness, and not only does it feel different, but the outcomes are actually much, much better. So in Oklahoma, we would have to say, well, if our school of thought was better, then surely our outcomes would be better. But what we see in Oklahoma is these cycles of incarceration and addiction and abuse are exacerbated generation after generation after generation, because we take someone who did something wrong, and instead of helping them restore, we punish them and put them in prison. And in the meantime, in Oklahoma, we're not offering anything to help them prepare to come back out. We're only preparing them to come back to us, to prison. So I think that's the reason why, is there's two different schools of thought. And my hope, part of my hope comes from seeing younger generations stepping in and thinking of it more holistically, with a fresh perspective and seeing things change.
Thank you.
You know what, I need to interrupt Jasmine because we're gonna run out of time.
Oh, sorry.
No, I love this. Who's my Facebook Live people? We need to shut this off when it's, everybody, thank y'all so much. We're gonna get, if y'all have questions for Adam, please ask him. He's gonna be with us all day.
Yep.
So please do that, and I would love to sit here all morning and do this because it's one of my favorite things to have these hard conversations. But we do need to get ready for visits, so we need to get our training